Over the course of 2 days, in the autumn of 1941, thousands of people were shot in Babyn Yar, on the outskirts of Kyiv. The extent of the punitive action only became known after the liberation of the city from Nazi invaders, but historians continue to study archival documents. Declassified materials that are capable of dispelling the myths of the Soviet propaganda about the role of the Ukrainian police shed light on the nationality of the victims and reveal who actually carried out the shootings. Babyn Yar is a tract in Shevchenko district of modern-day Kyiv. According to mapping sources, its territory occupies the area from Dorogozhitska Street to Kurenivka. Previously, one of the largest and deepest ravines on the territory of Kyiv ran through here. This place was called Kyiv, Switzerland in periodicals published in the capital at the beginning of the 20th century. But for 75 years, Babyn Yar has been associated with the horror of the period of the Nazi occupation in 1941 to 1943. Declassified documents confirm the number announced earlier, that more than 100,000 people were shot dead here. In fact, documents regarding Babyn Yar were known for a long time, but due to the fact the number of declassified materials available, both for researchers and ordinary citizens, has increased several-fold. In 1943, in order to investigate the crimes of the Nazis, the government of Soviet Ukraine formed a state commission. Kyiv residents and prisoners of the Syretsky war camp who managed to avoid the death penalty were interviewed. Evidence of crimes at Babyn Yar became part of Soviet accusations against the former leaders of Nazi Germany in the Nuremberg trials held at the International Court of Justice in Nuremberg. We store secret materials of the NKVD and KGB relating to the period of German occupation of Kyiv during World War II. As a rule, these are materials of interrogation of witnesses, maps and charts, which enable us to imagine what the Yar looked like and where the shootings took place. Part of the documents is an investigation of the tragedy, memories of the prisoners of war who were supposed to burn bodies in order to hide the crimes of the Nazis. The earliest date for the start of the shootings was stated in testimony submitted in November 1943 by Kyiv citizen Yanovich. According to him, the Germans entered Kyiv on September 19, 1941, and the very next day they took out groups, mostly Soviet prisoners of war, to be shot at Babyn Yar. From the materials, it was clear that the words spoken by a Kyiv citizen were the same as the words of other witnesses. According to staff at the Historical Archive, it was concluded that starting from September 20th, the Nazis took hundreds of people daily to be shot. Kyiv citizen Schwarzman, who later escaped from Babyn Yar during the shootings of September 29th, recalling the first days of the German occupation, stated, "I saw a German convoy drive prisoners of war along the Brest-Litovsk highway. There were thousands, half-naked and barefoot, with shovels in their hands. There were Ukrainians, Russians, and many young Jewish guys. They went in the direction of Babyn Yar. People threw pieces of bread to hungry prisoners, but those who picked it up were killed immediately." This is the pain of the city, something that will forever remain in the memories of Kyiv residents. The dark atmosphere of Babyn Yar hung over Kyiv for 2 years. Anyone could have been arrested and sent to Babyn Yar for any sort of violation. Files containing documents that can shed additional light on this tragedy are preserved in the Central State Archive of Public Organizations of Ukraine. They confirm that at various times, 5 gypsy camps, members of the Melnik-led Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, more than 700 patients of the Pavlov Mental Hospital, and 25,000 prisoners of war from the Syretsky concentration camp were shot. According to Tatiana Yevstafieva, who was one of the first to restore the details of the tragedy using the documents of Soviet secret services, during the occupation, almost all residents of Kyiv of Jewish nationality were killed. From September 29th to September 30th, 1941 alone, the Nazis shot dead more than 34,000 Jews. And a reason was invented: fires and explosions on Khreshchatyk Street, for which the Jewish people of Kyiv were blamed. Berlin was informed of this. The document is dated October 5th, 1941. This is the secret report of Major Koch, who among other things arrived in Kyiv for the sake of developing Kyiv and served as a representative of the Imperial Ministry under the commander of Southern Army Group. A fire in Kyiv destroyed the city center, the beautiful and majestic part of it. The fire ruined about 2 square kilometers and about 50,000 people were left homeless. They are somehow placed in abandoned apartments. As punishment for open sabotage, Jews in the city were killed. According to information from the operational SS group, around 35,000 people, half of whom were women. Measures to liquidate the Jewish population in Kyiv were approved by the headquarters of the Wehrmacht army. The printing house of the 6th German Army printed 2,000 copies of the order in Ukrainian, Russian and German, demanding that all Jews of the city of Kyiv gather at the intersection of Melnikova and Doktoriska. Ukrainian historians have paid attention to the fact that in different testimony, the variants of the order are different, though the essence is the same. It's also obvious that there were no such streets in Kyiv. This, according to researchers, has proved that the authors of the order knew little of the city. From all over Kyiv, Podil, Pechursk, Dmiivka, Shulyavka, Jews gathered with their things and children at the announced meeting place. There were many non-Jews in the crowd. There were representatives of mixed marriages, many accompanied Jews, relatives, acquaintances. The rumors spread by the Nazis that the Jews should be resettled did not arouse suspicion. The Lukyanivka-Tovarno railway station really was located not far from Babyn Yar. And so, when it became known about the executions, people made every effort to avoid going to Babyn Yar. It was difficult, because anyone who passed the area behind Melnikova Street did not return. In the witness reports attached to cases about the atrocities carried out by the Nazis in occupied Kyiv, it is stated that the booty for executioners were the personal belongings of those who were executed. People took the best they had with them, because they were counting on being resettled. The approaches to Babyn Yar were filled with abandoned things. The remaining items were declared the property of the Reich and brought to Nekrasivska Street. The school where the warehouse operated was for a long time a place of pilgrimage for German soldiers and bureaucrats providing with coupons. Tatiana Yevstafieva knows almost all the documents attached to the witness interview reports. There are facts that state that a Pole, Stanislav Wolski, was shot dead for trying to save his Jewish wife and 6-year-old child. The stories get sadder and sadder. The recollections are different. One Kyiv resident remembered how one Nazi had thrown the infant into Babyn Yar by taking him from his mother. Another, when the Germans knowingly did not notice Kyiv women taking children from the column of the doomed. Among the materials, there are memories when some Jews were betrayed to the occupying power by their nearest neighbors. But according to the Kyiv History Museum, the majority of Kyiv residents survived the shooting as their own tragedy. The shooting operation was entrusted to 4 A teams under the leadership of SS Standartenführer Blobel. 2 German police battalions were involved, the 45th under the command of Major Pieger and the 303rd led by Major Hannibal. The latter refused to carry out the order. According to the memoirs of Reich Foreign Minister Gerhard Kegel, the fact was ignored for a long time that some young SS men were losing their minds while carrying out these punitive actions. According to the documents, an additional detachment of the Ukrainian police was involved in the operation, which conducted the sorting of things and their delivery to a collection point.
Правда,
The truth, which we know from documents, is that the Ukrainian insurgent army didn't exist at that time, and it is incorrect to talk about the participation of this army in Babyn Yar. There were 2 OUN organizations. The old one was Melnik's, and the new one under the leadership of Bandera.
Старое под руководством полковника Мельника и новое под руководством Степана Бандеры. Они отправляли так называемые походные группы.
They sent expedition groups to the territory of Ukraine, freed from the Soviets, and formed an administration and police force, while the Germans allowed it.
Пока немцы это разрешали. В дни расстрела здесь присутствовал, значит, подразделение где-то из 300 полицейских набранных.
And on execution day, there was a unit of 300 people from a military camp in Zhytomyr. Soviet soldiers and officers of the Red Army, of various nationalities and partisanship. They patrolled the city, collected things, and they did not take part in executions.
Это украинская вспомогательная полиция, участие в расстрелах как таковых не принимала, не стреляли физически.
We have documents containing information about nationalists. There were nationalists who collaborated with Germans, but more often they are named as recruited agents. At the same time, we have testimony from the cells of the internal prison of the security services of the Third Reich, in which representatives of the organization of Ukrainian nationalists who were taken away and executed either at Babyn Yar or in other places of execution are mentioned. In summer 1943, before Kyiv passed into the hands of Soviet troops, the Nazis set the goal of destroying the traces of their crimes. To do this, a secret team led by SS Standartenführer Blobel was created. Groups of suicide arsonists were formed out of the prisoners in the death camp. They excavated human remains and crushed them, filling the furnaces in Babyn Yar. Usually, those who take part in burning of dead bodies in Babyn Yar were prisoners of the Syretsky concentration camp. They should have been the last to be killed and burned by the Nazis. We know that a few of the prisoners managed to escape. Only 15 persons survived. Someone during transportation, someone else during an escape from a camp. It was precisely these people who recalled these awful events. The Syretsky concentration camp, established in the spring of 1942, was one of the branches of the Sachsenhausen Nazi concentration camp. Prisoner of war Fedor Zavritany made a desperate attempt to escape. Freed from his shackles, he managed to escape. According to documents, after this incident, the Germans shot 12 prisoners and an SS guard. Among the documents stored in archives of the Security Service of Ukraine, there are criminal cases initiated against persons involved in the killings in Babyn Yar, representatives of the Wehrmacht, units of the Security Service and the SS, as well as former citizens of the Soviet Union who cooperated with the occupying authority. All of them were citizens of the Soviet Union. These were Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, and if we're talking about the Ukrainian police, we must understand that it was called so not because of ethnical features, but in accordance with the name of the territory where it operated. After liberation of the Soviet Union, a trial was held over Nazi criminals and their supporters from the local population in the capital of Soviet Ukraine. 12 Nazi executioners were executed on Hryshchatyk in the center of Kyiv. There was the idea to eternalize the memory of the victims. However, the decision was postponed. It was usual for the tragedy that occurred at Babyn Yar to be interpreted in accordance with the general party line. For example, everyone had to remember dead Soviet citizens, party members, partisans, and stay silent about the other parties to this tragedy. Accordingly, all attempts to honor the memory of the victims of Babyn Yar differently than the way that the Communist Party saw it were blocked by the KGB. In the early 60s, during the Khrushchev thaw, Jewish communities began to erect monuments to the victims of the Holocaust at their own expense in various towns around Ukraine. The Soviet authorities could not allow such amateur activity and so decided to lead this process. A competition held for the best project of a memorial for Babyn Yar was the first step taken by the Soviet authorities. The first monument to the victims of the shootings was only erected in the mid-70s. Builders found a 10-meter layer of ash while digging a pit. In the opinion of Tatiana Yevstafieva, this was confirmation of the fact that furnaces used to burn the bodies of killed people were located exactly near Dorohozhichi metro station in Babyn Yar. It is important to understand that Babyn Yar is not only a place where the Jews of Kyiv were shot in 1941, but also a living place, the history of which began before the war and continues to this very day. It's the history of the destruction of Babyn Yar by the Soviet authorities, the fight to perpetuate the memory or Sovietization of this memory. This story now continues in the form of the fight by local groups to perpetuate it. Taking into consideration documentary confirmations as confirmed by the director of the Historical Archive of the Security Service of Ukraine, Andrei Kohut, it's very difficult to draw conclusions that the killing of people was based on their ethnic origin. All the documents confirm that the people who were killed were Soviet citizens, but in the opinion of Vitaly Nakhmanovich, the Soviet authorities lied to its people when in Soviet times it commemorated only civilians. According to him, it's also a lie that only Jews were killed in Babyn Yar. Today, only memorials remind contemporaries of this awful tragedy and all those who could not escape. They should not be divided on the basis of ethnic origin, but should simply be remembered.